Okay, we're going to get started while folks are still coming in. So hello, everybody. Good evening or afternoon, wherever you might be zooming in from. My name is Alyssa Irizarry, and I am the Senior Vice President at Bowseat Ocean Awareness Programs. And I'm very excited to be welcoming you to the first in our new Water Wednesdays webinar series. So thank you so much for joining us today. So this new webinar series was created in conjunction with Bowseat's 10th annual Ocean Awareness Contest. And this year's theme is Water Rising, which invites students to explore and understand their intimate connection to water and to creatively communicate the need to protect this incredibly precious resource. And as a little teaser, I'm going to show a brief animation that was created for the contest by one of our former student artists who now serves on our Ocean Awareness Contest judging committee. So the driving question behind our programming this year is, what are the stories we need to tell about water to sustain and conserve it for current and future generations of life on Earth? And the goal of the Water Wednesdays webinar series, it's a mouthful, is to explore this question through the lenses of ecology, climate change, health, justice, and culture. So we hope this is a space for learning, for inspiration, and for conversation. And we also want to provide you with resources and opportunities to get involved and build connections beyond the webinar. Water rising is ultimately about water rising up in our consciousness and in our awareness. And it's about remembering that we are water. We are all literally bodies of water, and we all have a role to play in protecting water for human communities and for aquatic life on this blue planet. So to get us in the water mind space, we have a little activity for you here. So if you can, please go to menti.com and enter the code that you see. And I will also include the direct link in the chat, or you can use your smartphone and take a picture of the QR code here, and it should open it up. So I'm going to share that code in the chat, which you can click on. And once you get to it, type in 3 words or phrases about water, however and whatever that means to you. So it can be inspired by a memory. So for example, I might type in tide pools if I'm thinking about how I used to love to go explore tide pools when I visited the coast as a child. But you can also enter a description of water, like blue, if that's what comes to mind for you. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to start filling this in. So again, go to menti.com, enter this code, or use the URL that I've added in the chat, and we're gonna see what comes up. Ooh. This is so fun. We've got flow, we've got beauty, we've got cool, we've got a couple of actual locations like the Dead Sea, which is an incredible place, the Mediterranean, solvent, we've got coast beach, we've got reflection, refreshing, essential, yes, uncharted, cool, calming, definitely, thirsty, yes. last minute words or phrases. And I think my understanding about word clouds is the bigger the word, the more people typed that in. So we can see that life, yes, water is life. I'm glad that's like the biggest word in the middle of there. Waves, beautiful, blue. Great. Thank you all for participating in that with us. All right, and now I am very pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Emily Flaherty from Salem Sound Coastwatch. Salem Sound Coastwatch is a coastal watershed organization that's based on the North Shore of Massachusetts, which is the traditional territory of the Namkig Band of the Massachusetts tribe. Through educational programs, scientific monitoring, and restoration projects, Salem Sound Coastwatch works with government agencies, businesses, citizens, and other organizations to protect and improve the environmental quality of Salem Sound and its watershed. And since 2016, Bowseat has had the pleasure of collaborating with Salem Sound Coastwatch on various projects, including a public art installation about plastic pollution, storm drain mural projects, and other initiatives using creative communication as an educational tool to inspire folks to care for the health of local waterways. And Emily is an experienced science educator and conservationist, and I have personally learned a lot from her over the past several years. So it is with great pleasure that I hand the mic and the presentation over to her to take us on a water journey.
Thank you, Alyssa. What a great way to kick this off. And I have to say that Alyssa and the Bowseat are definitely one of my most favorite partners. It's always such a creative endeavor, and it's just the science and art merging together is really powerful. So I'm super excited to be here, and thank you all for joining us. I know some of you are educators and some of you are maybe artists interested in the contest that Bowseat is starting. Regardless of why you chose, I hope this inspires you to dig a little deeper about the water that you're so closely connected to, where your drinking water comes from and where your water flows to around you. So tonight is meant to be a bit of a water journey that you can start and hopefully not finish here tonight. So I'll lead you through a bit of learning about what a watershed is and how to find your local water, where it's coming from and where it's going. And then we'll get to practice with some of the tools that I'll share in the end. And hopefully some of you will share out what you learned about the water close to you. So I did recognize some places and some names, so it's great to have you. So those are things that I can connect to in the talk. And I saw some faraway places like Japan, so that will be fun for us to explore as well. So we'll start with the water planet. And this beautiful view just kind of amplifies how 71% of the Earth, right, is covered in water. And 96.5% of that is ocean water. So kind of a powerful statement. And we can go to this tool. This is our first tool we'll explore with. And it's called Earth Null School. And essentially what it is satellite data compiled into this model that you can actually change. So at the end, I'll share this link just like the other tools, and you can explore on your own. And the way this works is we can set it to explore the ocean, in this case, is what we want to think about, and currents in the ocean, and we can overlay the surface currents. So you can really start to see this movement of water in the ocean across the Earth. And you might notice some different colors. You might notice some white arrows if we zoom in. Give you a closer look here in the Atlantic Ocean. So for example, if we look at this major current right here, some of you might know that this is the Gulf Stream coming all the way from the Gulf of Mexico up the east coast of the US, and the white lines are showing that current. And the color is showing the speed of the current. So you can notice that red right in here, if I hover over this scale, red shows us, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, that it's moving at 1.44 meters per second where it's red. So you just learn, you can gather information from this, and you can also visualize that movement transporting water across the ocean. And so this is driven by variation in temperature in the atmosphere and the ocean. So the uneven heating of the earth is essentially what is causing movement of air and movement of water. So it's fascinating to think about the air that connects with this water on the surface of the ocean in the atmosphere, and how they do move in similar directions and they do affect each other. So the system of this movement of water in the ocean is quite complex. So let me zoom out. We're just gonna take a travel around the globe for a second. Let's travel over to Japan, since we heard someone is over in Japan. I don't know what time it is in Japan, but it must be quite different. So very similar current patterns you can see traveling along the shores, moving a bit faster here where the orange and red are, and coming over, and then you get these little spin-off, we call those gyres when, whoops, I'm going the wrong way, that create this circular current that spins off smaller and larger gyres. So this is our big view, if you will, of our water planet and the dynamics of it. If we zoom in just a little bit and travel to the land. So in that other view, you couldn't see the water flowing over the land all the way to the ocean, but that's how it's interacting. All of that water that's landing on the surface of the land, no matter where you are on Earth, it's flowing over the surface, through the ground, and eventually making its way to the ocean, no matter where you are on Earth, right? So this is our second tool. And this one is quite fascinating. It's actually got three pieces of, three different depictions of data. Over here, we've got what is called a radial histogram. It's pretty fascinating. So quick view there, we'll come back to that. And over here we have a bar graph that's showing the amount of flow of water over here on this axis, and then each month. So it tells us how much water in cubic meters per second is flowing through each river. And you notice the rivers over here on the map. So this is our watershed map over here of the US. You can see this outline of the US, right? They've taken away all information except the rivers, major rivers in the US. So you can see that outline of that bare data there. And when I hover over, you might notice something interesting if you can see all the different colors. So there's three colors. We've got this green up, whoops, let's go like that. Got the green that's showing the tributaries that flow into the major river, in this case, this red one, which is the Missouri River. So you can hover over and explore all of these different areas. And I want you to notice something. We're gonna go back to this radial histogram. So out here, the farther I am on this radius, the smaller the river is that it's highlighting. And as I move my way into the center of the circle, you start to notice that it's growing the watershed. So I'm going to define watershed for you in a moment if you haven't heard that word yet. And as I keep going and keep going, you notice, oh, I've hit the Mississippi River, right? And if I go all the way into the center, it shows us just how large the tributaries and the watershed of the Mississippi River are, as an example, in the US. So if you're up in North Dakota, that water is reaching the Gulf of Mexico eventually. So something to think about there. And where I want you to go in this thought eventually is what is flowing through that water and making its way to the ocean eventually. So we'll get to that. So this is a tool that you'll be able to play with too. We will share that at the end. So let's zoom in. Remember I was talking about watershed, but before we can understand watershed, I want to talk about topography. So topography is, simply put, the shape of the land. So it's the high points and the low points, the bumpy surface of the land that makes up the topographic features of the earth. There's also topography under the ocean that we can't see. So all of that earth land mass is bumpy. We know that, and that's called topography. So if we go to this next tool, it does something similar that we saw in the previous tool. I can hover over and it will highlight different rivers. But what's interesting here that I want to really talk about is, oops, I went the wrong way. Let's zoom in. What I really want to talk about is the topography. So they've used a base map in this tool, base map meaning just the bottom layer that we're looking at, as a topographic map. So I'm zooming in. A place that is very familiar to me and near and dear to my heart is Maine, where I grew up in the mountains of Maine. So I would like you to think about a place that's important and maybe special to you that you can explore in the end. So we'll go in here to highest peak on the Appalachian Trail called Katahdin, because I want you to see what I mean by topography. Let's make sure I'm going past it. Sorry, oh, there it is, right in the center, okay. So topography, again, is the shape of the land, and you can see the shading of the different features. But if you look at where it says Mount Katahdin in the center of the screen, and it says 5,260 feet. So that would be the peak of Katahdin, and that gives us our elevation. So that bumpiness of the land can be measured in elevation. And as you go down in elevation towards the base of the mountain, you have concentric circles that give you the elevation. So if you're a hiker, you're probably very familiar with topographic maps because it tells you how steep the land might be, how flat the land might be. You can notice, this tool is a little tricky, but bear with me. You'll notice here, this is a steep edge, and the topographic lines are closer together where the land is steep. So if you notice what happens when I make my way around that peak of the mountain, that color, we call that a polygon in mapping, but that color shape is moving, right? So I'm going to zoom back out and explain kind of what's happening here. Essentially, this is highlighting the watershed that's leaving that Katahdin mountain and flowing all the way down this river to the ocean. So this tool is helpful if you live somewhere inland and you aren't sure where your rivers flow to. You can start to really take a closer look. So back to this example, each of these smaller shapes are individual watersheds. Again, I'm going to define that in just a second, I promise. So this really helps you see that any water on this side of that peak is flowing this way. But you'll notice if I come around here, like, let's see, well, it's still flowing that same way, but it takes a different path to get there. It flows off this side of the peak down all the way to the ocean. So if you can imagine yourself standing on a hill or standing on a mountain, that water is shedding off in all different directions, right? And it may take a different path to eventually get to the ocean. So back to watersheds. So a watershed is the land where all of the water drains to the same water body. So this drawing, this graphic here, helps us see that a bit, where we've got, just like we saw on our maps, rain landing on these hilltops and all flowing down to this particular pond. and eventually all the way to the ocean. So this tool helps us explore the world and finding our watershed. Knowing your watershed is really important, in my opinion, and in Salem Sound Coastwatch's opinion, because it helps you understand how you impact that water and where that water is going. So I'll explain more of what I mean. But let's zoom in. Oops. So if, here's my zoom tool. So if I, again, choose the US, but again, this is a world view. So for those of you international people, this tool will be super helpful. Remember, we looked at our other tool that showed those interesting histograms, and we saw how large this Mississippi watershed is. So here is this Mississippi watershed outlined. The majority of the US for sure flows into the Mississippi. And if we go into where I was exploring earlier, we can see these watersheds here that that Mount Katahdin flows into all the way to the ocean, to the Gulf of Maine. So we could consider the Gulf of Maine watershed, which would be all of this area here. Very important bioregion to New England. What else did I want to share with you? Any questions in the chat, Alyssa, that I need to address?
No questions yet.
Okay, so we've thought a lot about natural watershed. We've thought about the shape of the land flowing over the land. And remember, there's also water underground that is following that same trajectory, flowing down in elevation all the way to the ocean. But what I would challenge you to think about is how the urban watershed impacts the ocean ultimately. The water right near us, but that again, water is flowing right to the ocean. So how is it all connected? So when we think of the urban watershed, we think of the infrastructure. So by infrastructure, I just mean the structure that humans have put in place. So how does that built world that humans have created impact how water will flow and eventually get to the ocean? So 4 things, just super simple version here to think about are catch basins, roads, storm drain pipes, and buildings. So catch basins are, I've shown it here, it's this little black dot in this satellite image. If you're walking down the street, you would see this as a grate in the street where the water, you can imagine seeing rain land on pavement and it flows into these catch basins. And then it goes into a pipe underground. And in this case, we can kind of see it right here. There would be a pipe right under here, and it would come right out to this outfall pipe and go into the ocean. So this is a beach near where I live, and it all of that water that drains from the streets is going straight into the ocean. If you live inland further, it's going into the rivers near you, and again, eventually all the way to the ocean. We also have roads, right? We've taken pavement, we've taken asphalt, and we've created this road structure that water can't soak through. It runs off and goes into these storm drain catch basins and storm drain pipes. So again, those pipes are underground. We typically can't see them. And then of course we have buildings where buildings have created a surface that water also can't seep into. People are doing green roofs and other interesting things to change that. But for the most part, that is definitely affecting how water is flowing over the land. So I don't know, honestly, how many towns have this. I would say for the most part here in the US, our cities and towns have tools. So this is the Beverly, Massachusetts city website, and they have a GIS tool. So GIS is Geographical Information Systems. It's basically just taking maps and data and layering them on top of each other to tell a story. So in this case, we are north of Boston. If I zoom out a bit more, I will show you Boston. So here's Boston, one of the major US cities. So we're just north of that, a suburb of Boston, very urban area, right? A lot of built infrastructure that humans have created. And this particular layer that I've turned on over here, I can switch it on and off. I'm going to turn off the topography for now. But catch basins, I wanted to highlight because it just shows how much of the water is flowing into the pipes underground rather than seeping into the earth and flowing naturally to the ocean. It's being piped to the ocean instead. So just for a minute, imagine you're walking in an urban or suburban area and you're watching the rain fall on the street, flow into the catch basin, and it's going underground in a pipe to the ocean or to a river. What is being carried with it that might impact the watershed and impact the ocean and the health of it? So a lot of our education efforts are around what homeowners can do and what general citizens can do. We also work with cities, but what can we do as homeowners or as apartment dwellers? So what's traveling through the stormwater? A lot of it is pesticides that people apply to their gardens to try to kill insects, fertilizers to help plants grow. And these things, you know, fertilizers used in smaller quantities and used smartly, but when we add too much, it flows into the storm drains and causes problems. I often, when I think of the Mississippi Delta, they call it, right, or the Mississippi watershed, and the dead zone that often exists in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, when you think about just what we visualized a moment ago about how large that watershed is, it's flowing over all of that land and all of that agricultural land specifically, where fertilizers and pesticides are definitely used. And that flows all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico into the ocean. And that is what's causing those dead zones. It's very problematic for the ocean. So even the common homeowner can help that problem.
Emily, I have a question for you that just came in the chat.
Okay.
And we can talk about it later, but I think it's relevant. So right now, and this is a question from Natalie. What would you say the best way to dispose of paint water would be for the environment? Would dumping it down the sink negatively impact our watersheds too?
So the best thing, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by paint water. Maybe that's because you're an artist, Natalie, I'm guessing. So if you're having small quantities of paint that you're using in your art, I would say down the drain, definitely, because that water is filtered, that water is treated. But if you're, you know, painting your home or you have gallons of old paint sitting around, the best thing to do is to open up the can and let it dry out, and then you put it in your garbage. So I guess it depends on which kind of paint you're talking about. And then, really good question, by the way, Natalie, really good question. We have so many products, don't we, that we're trying to figure out how to dispose of on a daily basis. And then litter, the last one I have on this particular list. Litter is a big one. Marine debris, we know it's getting a lot of attention because it's a big problem right now. So that is definitely making its way from the streets all the way to the ocean and causing entanglement and ingestion problems. So I now challenge you to think about, where on earth are you? What is your water journey? What is important to you? What body of water is maybe near and dear to your heart? One that you've been to many times, one that you went to once and it just stuck with you, a place that you want to go, wherever these tools take you. I encourage you to go and think about how that water is flowing and how humans are impacting it as well.
Okay, so folks, if you have a question, you are welcome to unmute yourself, turn your camera on, whatever you feel comfortable with, in the chat. We will open the floor for general questions as you continue to poke around with these tools. But yeah, questions for either Emily or I about the tools that you were using, about water in general, about water conservation, watersheds. There was a word that was new to you that you want explained, anything, you're open for questions.
So Leopoldo has a question about pollution. So I'm going to pop another link in the chat. It only works in the US. It's an EPA, Environmental Protection Agency resource. And it helps you find your watershed, but it also helps you learn about pollution in your watershed as well. It can be kind of alarming sometimes because there's a lot of impaired waterways in our country. Mm-hmm. But it tells you if it's swimmable, that sort of thing. And I also, Alyssa and I talked about this, and this will be at the end as well, but encourage you to reach out to your local watershed organization. Most communities are, well, all communities are in a watershed, but most communities have a watershed organization that you can get in touch with, you can volunteer for. They're a great resource for information about the quality and the health of your waterways too.
I think I read a statistic that over half of the country's flowing water are in poor biological condition. And I'm wondering, Emily, if you can talk to how organizations or government officials or even citizen scientists, how they go about assessing water health. What are some of those tools or measurements that folks use?
Sure. So we do a water quality sampling, and primarily we're looking for bacteria. So bacteria is one of the indicators for poor health, but they're also testing for heavy metals and things like that. So it depends on where you live and historically what the issues are with your waterway. So Boston is an interesting example, right? Because it's a very old city. And the infrastructure, right? The infrastructure that built part of that, like this old. So it wasn't very long ago that we were pumping raw sewage right into the ocean, into Boston Harbor. So that has since stopped, obviously. But we're still finding, even in other communities, connections or pipes that are old and leaking. So we're constantly looking for those sources to fix the old infrastructure and repair it so that the water is that much cleaner. Did that answer the question, Alyssa?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you spoke to that. It really depends on what you're looking for. But I know that you guys do a lot of different kind of monitoring and engage citizen scientists in that work. So I'm sure it looks a little bit different depending on the water body and where folks are. But it's, yeah, Natalie's saying like using the pollution tool and she's shocked to see how many bodies of water around Pittsburgh are labeled as impaired for aquatic life.
Yes.
Emily, sorry, when you talk about the organization to contact, you mean like the water management, like the South Florida Water Management, or like a waterkeeper organization?
I think I was encouraging you to reach out to the waterkeeper organization, as you put it. Water management, so for us, we're a nonprofit, right? We're an NGO. We work closely with the state water management and the EPA, but we're separate from them. Not that you shouldn't reach out to them, but typically your waterkeeper organization is very open to having you volunteer, and part of their job as an organization is to help educate people. So they're very open and easy to work with there, and they're a good conduit to the management organization as well.
Thank you.
Of course. heard more and more fresh water is going into our oceans, which is also part of sea level rise. Linda, I wonder if you're thinking about, with climate change, especially in our area in New England, we'll have, it's predicted to have a higher precipitation. So we'll have flooding in our area from water on land flowing to the ocean, but also sea level rise. So coastal areas are definitely going to face that problem with storms. So you'll have storm surge, sea level rise, and increased precipitation flowing off the land, making its way to the ocean. So I'm not sure if that's what you were referring to. Also, as I think about that more, Linda, when we have this built infrastructure, a lot of that fresh water landing on the roads is going through the storm drains and going to the ocean rather than filtering through the land. So that could also be what you're thinking of there. I agree, Sarah. I think these tools help students, help children visualize it too. Helps me. I love a good visual tool. How about our folks in India and Japan? If they're still with us, I'm curious if they were able to find something interesting from the tools. Another two things, actually, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention. Dog poop is a major source of water pollution. Just picking up our dog poop, and I own a dog, so I've been exploring different ways to dispose of this waste, from composters in your backyard, flushing it down the toilet, but definitely not leaving it on the ground. It has the highest amount of bacteria in all the poop that we find on the ground. So that can be cause of high bacteria counts in our waterways. Wastewater from broken pipes and built infrastructure not sufficiently healthy after going through filtration in groundwater before flowing out. That's a good question. It depends. It depends on how close it is to that waterway. But typically, if we find high bacteria counts in a water body, and we can trace it back to a pipe, it's from a pipe that is close to that waterway. Sometimes you'll have pipes that actually cross streams and rivers. So in our very urban areas, everything is very close together. Something that I didn't talk about is our drinking water. So we're talking about pollution, we're talking about wastewater, stormwater, but I also challenge you to think about where your drinking water comes from. Which watershed is it in? Is it from a reservoir? Is it from a well? Is it straight from a lake or something like that? So that information is usually available to you on your town website, town or city that you live in.
Emily, do you have a resource for, I know that in the US, cities and towns are supposed to provide citizens with water quality information. Is there a way that folks can find this data online if they don't receive that? I know I've gotten those mailers in the past that tell you different measurements for what's in your water, although I think I heard like there's something like 80,000 things that might be in the water, but only like a small person, maybe 100 are actually measured. Some small fraction of that are actually measured or tested. Is there a way that folks can find this kind of information for themselves about what's in their water so they can be better informed about the choices that they make, or about advocating for clean water in their communities?
Yeah, even Sharon just commented. So cities are required to post that information. You can typically find it as, you know, a PDF or something like that on their websites. And it does give you the breakdown of what they're testing for. And also it's a great education tool. If teachers out there, they can use that to have students read. I think it's really important. It tells about where their drinking water is coming from, which reservoirs, which wells. At least I know locally, and I'm almost positive that's the case across the US because it's an EPA kind of mandate.
I also heard of something called, I think it's called Statistics for Action, and I will double check this, and if that's the right name, I'll include it in the follow-up email. But it brings in statistics about water and other issues that folks can use to arm themselves with information to advocate for policy or for changes.
Oh, I'd love to see that, yes.
So I think we have a couple minutes left, so let's move into what folks can do. I think we've talked a lot about many of these things already in terms of specific actions. Do you want to talk about some of these, Emily?
Yeah, so just kind of a fun one. Citizen science is a really powerful tool right now that people can get involved with lots of different projects. All, you know, the spectrum of them. So a couple here. The Clean Swell app is one that you can put on your phone, and anytime you're walking about and you pick up some trash, you can log it in the app, and it goes to Ocean Conservancy, and they compile all of that data. And it's one of those that's useful in thinking about policy, you know, big picture, what makes change happen and how do we change policy? Well, we need data and we need information to do that. So entering data in an app like that can definitely help make change. And of course, we always want you to share what you learn with a friend and spread the good word and reach more people. And I already said this one, but I'll say it again, connect and support your local watershed organization. They're typically very small organizations, passionate people, lots to share with you and ways to get involved. So I encourage you to reach out and find that group. Advocate for clean water and vote. Of course, we need to all vote and have our voice be heard.
Yeah, I think especially in our local and municipal elections, I mean, that really matters when it comes to the impact on your local environment. You know, these local officials are responsible for a wide range of important environmental decisions like plastic bag bans, like in Salem and Beverly, right, to climate resiliency plans and the use of our public water resources in equitable ways. So definitely vote if you can, and continue to advocate and celebrate clean water. And if you have any other things that you do that you want to share in the chat with folks that you do to protect clean water, please let us know. And in the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to give you some information about the Ocean Awareness Contest. I imagine some of you are already familiar with the contest if you've made your way here to the webinar tonight. But here are kind of the fast facts if you want to get involved or share it with a friend after the event. So like I said earlier, the theme for our 2021 Ocean Awareness Contest is Water Rising. And the contest invites young people ages 11 through 18 from around the world to create visual art, film, music, poetry, spoken word, web-based and interactive media, music, and creative writing that explores this theme, Water Rising. And students can earn cash awards of up to $1,500, and their work becomes part of our global art collection that is helping to raise awareness and inspire protections of our oceans. We also have a free online resource studio to support student exploration of water. We've got lesson plans on there, multimedia articles, games, and much more. So definitely check that out. And BOWSI also offers $750 Educator Innovation Awards to teachers who use the contest as a teaching tool in your physical or virtual classrooms. So you can find complete program details, inspiration, resources, and the submission form on our website, bowseat.org/contest, which is right there. And again, all of this information will be emailed to you after the presentation. And then finally, in our last moment, and you're hearing it here first, but please save the date for next month's Water Wednesdays webinar, which will be on Wednesday, November 18th. We're really excited to be hosting our friends from Pangea Seed Foundation, which is a international nonprofit organization that's acting at the intersection of culture and environmentalism to further the conservation of our oceans. So we will be discussing their international public art campaigns that create meaningful environmental change through artivism. And the registration link for that will go up later this week, and we'll be sure to include that when we send you the recording, and also these follow-up links for the watershed visualization tools. So yeah, if you have any final questions or comments, please shoot them in the chat. But I just want to extend a really big thank you to Emily for taking us on this water journey, and a big thank you to all of you who came out to spend your time with us to learn and build community around water. And we really hope to see you at a future Water Wednesdays webinar.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Alyssa and BowSeat. It's great.